So tonight is another one of our practical halacha shiurim. When I say practical halacha, it's a lot of this is based on things my patients have asked me, questions they have asked, and concerns that they have. First of all, I'm Jonathan Herman. I'm an OBGYN in New York. I've been delivering babies for the past 30 years. For those who don't know, today I saw 47 patients in the office and then went to the hospital, delivered 4 babies, got it home in time for Mincha Marav, and brings us to this point. And people now know what I do on my free time. We do halacha shiurim. Tonight, our shiur, our discussion is going to be about fasting on Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur, as we have Tisha B'Av right upon us. And this is not only going to apply to this year, but it's also for years to come and for Yom Kippur's to come and Tisha B'Av's to come, as this year might be slightly different than other years. Every year, my patients ask me if they have to fast, what is their criteria for fasting, when they could break their fast. Additionally, I get 20 or 30 emails every year from patients. And what I did is I went back and looked at my emails and culled some of the interesting ones that will bring out, and we'll talk about different halacha points. I'm going to start each email with a basic heading, what the email is about, and then I'm going to read the email and we'll have the opportunity to discuss it. I think in total, there are 18 emails. I kept them short and edited down so it won't take so much time. Additionally, as we had intended, after our last discussion, our last year on abortion in halacha, we asked if people had questions or thoughts they would like us to discuss, to send them in. And after we're done discussing fasting, we have 9 questions and comments that people have sent me since that year that I'm going to address Rabbi Sigelman and ask him to opine and point us in the right direction. With that said, I'm just going to turn it over for a second.
Okay, thank you very much. As the doctor mentioned, we will discuss the halachos and different scenarios, different situations involving pregnancy-related questions in fasting. It is important for everyone to have a personal conversation with their doctor and their rabbi. Each situation is very different, and often when we deal with more specifically Yom Kippur, so the approach very often is that if a person is ill, a person is sick, and fasting may make it worse, so they need a heter from the Rav to fast and not a heter from the doctor to break the fast. And it's an important attitude going into the sugya when we balance health and halacha. It's critical that we do everything in our power to keep the halacha, and sometimes the halacha is fast, and sometimes the halacha is to eat. And I think especially when it comes to Yom Kippur, we never want to find ourselves making a decision to be too frum, overly machmer, quote unquote, if it's going to compromise health. And I think that that's why this year is an exciting one, because it's a conversation that really requires both sides of the conversation, and both the Rav and the doctor, the medical professional, should really be in close contact and communication to see to it that the patient is getting the best medical advice as well as halachic advice, whatever that may be, and that's very circumstantial. So therefore, everyone should have that conversation. But this tonight, Be'ezus Hashem, will be hopefully an informative and educational evening to paint the picture so people understand a little bit of the sugya, the medical ideas, to put them on the right direction.
With that, we're going to start with the first one. And the first email is about 6 to 7 weeks pregnancy. Hi, Dr. Herman. I hope all is well. I wanted to know if I should be fasting on some Gedalia and Yom Kippur. I will be around 6 to 7 weeks pregnant then. What is your recommendation for fasting on Yom Kippur? I tend to get nauseous if I don't eat. And I will add to that, or ask from that, what is the issue of eating and drinking on Yom Kippur? What is the issur of eating and drinking on Tisha B'Av? And what is the difference between the two?
We also have Tzom Gedalia in there.
I was going to bring that up right after we get that first answer. Yes.
Okay, so I think really to start the evening, I think we need to have a basic understanding, a basic background of fasting in general and the different fast days on the Jewish calendar. We could start with Yom Kippur. I mean, that was the question that you asked. Yom Kippur is the only biblical fast. It's the only fast where the Torah tells us that we can't eat. The Torah doesn't exactly tell us not to eat. The Torah tells us ve'inisem es nafsho sechem, right? And from that, the fact that we have to torture ourselves or we have to experience inui. So we learn from there, that's deduced that you're not allowed to eat on Yom Kippur, as well as the other restrictions on Yom Kippur. Eating on Yom Kippur is a serious isser, and it is the most. It is by far the most serious fasts. Tisha B'Av and the other fast days, so Gedalia, Sarba Tevis, Tainis Esther, and Shavuos Arba Tammuz. So those are what we call, not in Tisha B'Av, those are called the minor fasts, and then Tisha B'Av is somewhere sandwiched in the middle. Now, Tisha B'Av and all of the other minor fasts are only midrabanan. So it's critical to understand the difference between Tisha B'Av, the minor fasts, on the one hand, and Yom Kippur on the other hand, and that is that since Yom Kippur is the Oraisa, it's biblical, the only justification to break one's fast is that of sakana, is that of danger. If the patient is in danger or the pregnancy is in danger, so therefore, or at that point, we can begin to discuss breaking one's fast. Tisha B'Av and the other minor fasts, since it's not a deraisa, it's only a derabanan, we don't have to go to the extreme of sakana to justify breaking one's fast. But once a person reaches a makom choli situation where they're ill, so already at that point, they're able to break the fast. And of course, the critical question is, how do we define sakana for Yom Kippur? And how do we define choli for Tisha B'Av in the minor fasts? So, with that background, we can address Yom Kippur, and then I imagine we'll get into the Tisha B'Av discussion, right?
Yep, sure.
So again, the question was, we're dealing with a patient who is 6 or 7 weeks
pregnant. She says
right.
she gets nauseous if she doesn't eat, and she wants to know what to do with Tzom Gedalia and with Yom Kippur.
Okay, so right off the bat, we can tell you
she's healthy.
Right. Oh, that's exactly what I was going to say. So right off the bat, the first thing that I would do with such a shaila is I would take the approach of most poskim, not everyone, but most poskim, who say that if a woman is pregnant or actively nursing, they're not obligated to fast the minor fasts. Tzom Gedalia being one of the minor fasts, so this pregnant woman or a nursing woman would not be obligated to fast at all Tzom Gedalia. Not everyone agrees to that. In fact, the Ramah, I think, disagrees. But contemporary normative halacha says that these women do not have to fast.
My interest. Do not have to fast? Should they be eating? Let's say they want to fast. I want to fast Tzom Gedalia.
Dr. Herman, I've yet to meet such a woman.
Okay.
But assuming they're out there. Yeah. Assuming they're out there. I believe, I didn't look it up before, but I believe the Ramah brings that they should be fasting. In which case, you certainly have room to be machmir. If you wanted to be machmir, there is what to rely on to be machmir. The caveat I would throw out is that it should be done in consultation with your doctor. That assuming your doctor says that it poses no threat or compromise to your health, should a woman want to be machmir, even though she is pregnant or nursing, she has the ability to do so and the right to do so, but she doesn't have to. Most women are very happy with that answer. Most women are very happy.
Just to go over it, we're talking about minor fasts.
Minor fasts.
As opposed to Yom Kippur.
And opposed to Tisha B'Av.
As opposed to Tisha B'Av in the middle. We're not talking about Tisha B'Av yet.
Correct. Okay. Correct. We're not talking about Tisha B'Av, but we're just focusing on the Tzom Gedalia element. So insofar as Tzom Gedalia is concerned, since it is a minor fast, and this woman is pregnant, according to the majority of contemporary poskim, she is not obligated to fast one iota. She can wake up in the morning and immediately, even if she feels totally fine, she can make herself a cup of coffee and an omelet and enjoy the New York Times. There's no issue.
Herself, this is a fast. I only should be eating to get by, or could she just go about regular?
She could go about regular. She doesn't have to minimize her or change her diet. The poskim discuss if a woman shouldn't go all out. They shouldn't. If they typically have a bowl of cereal and milk for breakfast, they shouldn't have a 5-course breakfast on the day of a tinus. But they don't have to think twice before putting anything in their mouths. They could eat like it's a regular Tuesday. That's insofar as Tzom Gedalia is concerned. Regarding Yom Kippur, which we said is the only biblical fast, it's the most machmir of them all. So there, and the only justification to break the fast is sakana. So what I would do with that question is I would throw it right back at her and I would say, listen, you have to go to Dr. Herman and you have to ask Dr. Herman, is there a sakana for me to fast? And with that, I throw it back to you. What would you tell such a patient, 6 or 7 weeks experiencing nausea, about fasting on Yom Kippur from a medical standpoint?
That they should fast.
Why is that?
Because I don't look at them as being in a sakana situation. I look at them as not feeling well. I don't see the sakana that's coming their way. Now, listen, if somebody is throwing up tremendously, that changes the scenario. But feeling nauseous is, I start by the idea of if you're going to the hospital, if you need to go to the hospital, then I look at it different. If you're nauseous and staying home, you're not in sakana. And I don't know if it's a fair definition, but if you have to go to the emergency room, then it changes my scenario and my discussion with them.
Mm-hmm. So let's assume that patient comes back to me.
Yep.
And says, I spoke with Dr. Herman and he said, I'm fine. He said, I might be nauseous, especially if they rely on their morning crackers, their afternoon crackers, their bagel, whatnot. They rely on their carbs in order to minimize the nausea. They won't have that, so they'll be, throwing up. But Dr. Herman said that that's not a sakana, that's a discomfort. But that's not necessarily a sakana, assuming that it doesn't become excessive, which would lead to dehydration, which is an important consideration. So at that point, I would tell them that on Yom Kippur, you have to fast. The halacha is pregnant women and nursing women fast. Now, we may be familiar with the concept of shiurim.
We'll get to that in a few minutes because I have a couple of questions before we get there.
Okay, well, fine. So I guess we could discuss it more at length later. But the answer to this question would be you have to fast. And should you feel that, let's say it's on Yom Kippur, you're not going to be able to call Dr. Herman, or you won't get through to the whatever you don't want to call. And you feel that we've left the realm of just uncomfortable nausea, and I've thrown up a few times, and I'm concerned that I'm going to get dehydrated. So that's already room for us to consider this as sakana. And then we have to discuss, well, what's the next step? Do we just break it, or do we go shiurim? So, I don't know, we could discuss that soon, but shiurim is definitely a very important conversation when it comes to Yom Kippurim.
Okay. Now, I find, and it's interesting to me, in my little small study, that my patients who are Hasidic background have more leeway to break their fast than my patients who are not. And I always found that was interesting. And then I heard of from a long time ago, the issue from Badatz versus the Tzitz Eliezer, And I think that might be the source of it, but I'm not sure. So I just want you to talk a little bit about that issue that occurred with Dayan Yaakov Yisrael Fisher Zatzal.
Yeah.
This is more out of interest than practicality.
Yeah, there were some Hasidic Rebbe's and some Hasidic Dayanim who ruled that a woman, even in her childbearing years, not a woman who's pregnant, not a woman who is nursing, but a woman in her childbearing years is not obligated to fast at all. Obviously, we're not talking about Yom Kippur. Now, it happens to be that I think Rabbi Yaakov Yisrael Fisher was talking about Yom Kippur. And there he said that even on Yom Kippur, a woman should not fast, I believe, until the 9th month. Correct. I think that's what Dayan Fisher said. Once you get to the 9th month,
you go into labor, then it's no big deal. But
right. So it was a radical psak that he wrote in his Sefer Even Yisrael. It was a radical psak that basically tanesim don't apply to women. That women have a status of a chola always, and therefore they're not obligated to fast at all except for Yom Kippur on the 9th month. That psak was not of Dayan Fisher, was not really accepted, certainly not in the Litvisher communities, although it's sometimes used as in conjunction with something else, as a sniff, meaning when we have a few considerations, we'll throw that into the mix to help us formulate a psak. But people typically don't rely on that. There's a classic Hasidic joke. I don't know how nice it is, but that they say that a woman who's pregnant, she doesn't have to fast. A woman who's nursing, she doesn't have to fast. If you're not pregnant and you're not nursing, then you're stam chayla. Chayla doesn't have to fast. So it could be that in the Hasidic community where they're having more children, the average number of children in a family is more perhaps than your standard Litvish community. So it could just be that a woman is always going on from pregnancy to nursing, and her nursing is her birth control. And when she stops nursing, she gets pregnant. So, that could be the idea. But there definitely were Hasidic poskim who were more makel, and they do have their, the right to rely on that in the Hasidic community.
Okay. Number 2. Is it safe? Okay, so we already answered a little bit about fasting. Is it safe? Here comes the email. I wanted to ask you if it is safe for me to fast on Yom Kippur. I have barely been able to go an hour and a half without eating. I make sure to bring something with sugar and carbs with me wherever I go. I can't stand in place for more than a few minutes at a time without getting cold and tingly. I need to be moving around. I sat for davening and Shemona Esrei on Rosh Hashanah, and I have to rock back and forth on my feet when I stand for a little period of time. I will likely stay in bed for Yom Kippur so I can fast, and I will talk to my Rav. But first I need to ask you if it's safe for me to fast before I try. Okay, so we just talked about, is it safe? And we talked about what a chola is and defining a little bit harm. But I would like to talk to you a little bit about the statement of not going to shul on Yom Kippur. Okay, I have a lot of women who feel that they would drink shiurim in order that they go to shul on Yom Kippur, rather than fasting and lying in bed the whole time. So I'd like to hear what you have to say.
This is a classic conversation that takes place between rabbi and congregant, between husband and wife. And I think what it brings out is an emotional perspective versus a halachic perspective. Whether it makes sense to you logically, rationally, emotionally, or not, the fact of the matter is that the most important part of Yom Kippur is fasting. That is by far the most essential and critical part of the day. Going to shul is not. Going to shul is lovely. It's wonderful. It may be meaningful, but fasting is the primary avoda of Yom Kippurim. And that's 100% true. That is backed by multiple sources. And even if it doesn't sit well with a person, because my whole chinuch, my whole upbringing, my whole experience of Yom Kippurim has been in shul, whether we're talking about the male or the female. We could talk about the woman on the women's side and the crying and the tears and the tefillah and the kavana. We could be talking about the male whose wife is pregnant, right? The most important part of Yom Kippur is to see to it that everyone who can fast, fasts. And therefore, if that means that a wife, a woman, a pregnant woman stays in bed for the entire Yom Kippur, and it means that the husband who has 2 little kids running around at home, they have no childcare, and the wife is in bed, and it means that the husband will spend his Yom Kippur in a living room with his 2 kids, that is the most meaningful Yom Kippur they could possibly have. And I'll tell you from a personal perspective, just from experience, I've had a number of Yom Kippur pregnancies, not me personally, but my wife, and I have had Yom Kippur mufsafs from my dining room. I've had a ne'ilah or 2 from my dining room, and it might not be the shul experience that we all think of, but that's what it's about. I'll just before I give it back to you, Dr. Herman, I'll just tell you one of the Yom Kippurs. It's probably my son Meir Simcha, who was born on Shmini Atzeres. So this was just before Shmini Atzeres. Okay, my wife was 9 months pregnant, and I came to shul. I was in yeshiva at the time, and my Rebbe, Rabbi Soloveitchik, so he saw me in the morning, and he said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "What do you mean what I'm doing? It's Yom Kippur." He said, "But your wife is pregnant." I said, "Yeah, she's in bed." "What's with the kids?" "The kids. I mean, we might have had a babysitter. I don't remember." He said, "You have to go home and check on your wife." I said, "Rebbe, I just got to shul." He said, "I don't care. Go home, check on your wife, and then come back." And I did that. I went home, and I came back. A few minutes later, I got to daven a little bit. I see my Rebbe coming down the aisle, and he says, "How's your wife doing?" I said, "She's fine." He says, "Maybe you should go and check on her." Okay, fine. At a certain point, I told him, "Rabbi Soloveitchik, I'm fasting also. I don't live right next to yeshiva. It's a walk." He said, "I don't care. Go home." And a few times, I think 5 or 6 times throughout the davening, he made me leave. He actually made me leave and go check on my wife. And then after Ma'ariv, I came back from Ma'ariv. He told me to go home after Mincha, not to stay for Ne'ilah. I don't remember. No, come back for Ne'ilah. Afterwards, he tells me, he said, I would apologize that I disturbed your davening, but you can only apologize if you're not going to do it again. And as soon as I get home, I'm going to pick up the phone. I'm going to call you to make sure that your wife is okay, because we have to remember the most important part of Yom Kippur is your wife fasting. And if it means that you're not going to be in shul or you're going to have to leave throughout the davening, that's what it means. And this is the way Reb Shlomo Zalman Paskid and many others. So it is so important to make this message clear to the women, to the husbands, to everyone, that the primary concern is fasting and shul is secondary. To take care of the kids, stay at home, and make sure you fast if you can.
Drinking less than a shear. A lot of people feel, I am still fasting, I am drinking less than a shear, so I'll drink less than a shear and I'll go to shul.
No, I don't agree with that. And the reason is because on Yom Kippur, although the shear, the actual shear, which is the Isser of Yom Kippurim, is not a kazayas, it's a koseves, which is a little larger than a kazayas. But there's a concept called chatzi shear. Chatzi shear asur min haTorah. If a person, you can't eat a chazra of pig, a kazayas of pig. You can't have a kazayas of pig. Now, so maybe I'll eat a little bit less than a kazayas, right? Can I eat a little bit of less than a kazayas of pig? The Torah only says I'm not allowed to eat a kazayas. So we know that you're not even allowed to eat less than a kazayas. Why? Because it's chatzi shear. Even though it's not the full shear, it's chatzi shear. And chatzi shear asur min haTorah, that's also an isser d'oraisa. Now, the reason why we do it on Yom Kippur is because, and we implement shiurim, is because it's better, at least it's better than Yom Kippur, than eating a full shiur in Yom Kippur, but it's still an isser d'oraisa. So if we could get away with not breaking our fast on Yom Kippur, but by doing shiurim, so that's a principle called hakal tchila. We do the lowest that we possibly can get by with, and then if that doesn't work, then we'll have to break it. But it's still, person should know, eating shiurim is still an isser d'oraisa on Yom Kippur. Justified b'makom sakana but it's still without a sakana. It's still an isur daraisa, not an isur of Yom Kippur. It's an isur of chatzi shir. So that's why eating a chatzi shir and going to shul is also not an appropriate approach.
Number 3, this is a 3-part question. Okay, I had a recent miscarriage and I just found out that I'm pregnant. The second part is a patient who lost a baby late in pregnancy and now finds that she's newly pregnant. And C, I put this in there, a patient who had to terminate a pregnancy recently and now finds that she's pregnant. And she's scared, she's worried. All 3 of these are slightly different cases. And now she's faced with fasting on Tisha B'Av and on Yom Kippur.
So again, in all the cases, she's pregnant, right? Just one. The first case was that she got pregnant after a miscarriage.
Right. She was 6 weeks pregnant. She just got married. She's 19 years old. She got pregnant 3 months after getting married. She miscarried. She's upset. Her heart aches. 4 months later, she finds that she's pregnant, and it's the week before Tisha B'Av.
Yeah. Poskim have a little bit of a different approach when it comes to fasting after a miscarriage. There's a little bit of a machlokes, whether it's 1 miscarriage or 2 miscarriages. And at a certain point, we say, oh, this woman has recurrent miscarriages, or we see that she is more at risk, perhaps, for miscarriage.
Medically, we look at that as 3 miscarriages.
Right, correct.
We start working on it after 2 because it's very sad when somebody has 2.
Correct.
The book
correct.
says, yeah.
Correct. I agree with that. But so I've seen in the poskim in the past that there's a difference. But so some poskim say after 1 miscarriage, and she's pregnant now, we would treat her like a regular pregnant woman, whatever the halacha would be. After 2 miscarriages, we were a little bit hesitant, and therefore on Tisha B'Av, it might in fact be a heter to not fast on Tisha B'Av, and on Yom Kippur, it might be a reason to start with shiurim and to have shiurim, not to break the fast on Yom Kippur, but at least to have shiurim. It also might depend on the nature of the miscarriage, whether it happened at 6 weeks. There was no heartbeat, or there was barely a heartbeat. By the next appointment, by the second appointment, we didn't see anything, or a later miscarriage, where the poskim treat the later miscarriage a little bit more machmer than an early pregnancy, than a loss. Which
that was the second situation. We have an unexpected late in the pregnancy, and the third one is we know what went wrong, and the patient terminated, but now finds herself pregnant again and is worried.
So at that point, I would throw it back to the doctor. Is the woman at more of a risk because of what she went through? After the termination, what her body experienced. So is she weaker? Is she in the category of a chola or a misukan for Yom Kippur, right? To determine what the halacha would be in terms of fasting.
And I would say if she got pregnant 3 months after, yes, or within the year afterwards, yes. But if it was later on, then really not. Okay, number 4. A patient is trying to have a baby for 5 years, and they failed IVF 3 times. And now it finally is quote unquote successful, and she finds herself 6 weeks pregnant. And these cases clearly come to my office.
Yeah.
What do I do? She spent 20, 30, 60,000 on it. She had all of that heartache, and now she's 6 weeks pregnant. She's on multiple medications to help her maintain that pregnancy, and otherwise she's healthy. And she's saying, I can't fast on Yom Kippur. If something happened, it would be unbelievable.
Right. I think the first question that we have to consider is: was there a heartbeat? Was there no heartbeat?
Heartbeat now.
Heartbeat. So if there's no heartbeat, so I would say that she could drink shiurim. She could drink shiurim. And by the way, drinking shiurim, especially if you start at night, and we didn't discuss what shiurim are, but shiurim, let's assume even you go the most machmir window of time every 9 minutes. You're having, let's just for simplicity's sake, an ounce every 9 minutes, let's just say.
It's coming up, but yes.
You can really hydrate yourself in a very serious way. And you shouldn't need more than that. we generally assume that before a heartbeat, we're Meko. We're Meko certainly on minor fasts, even on Tisha B'Av. She doesn't even need Shiurim. After the heartbeat, it would come back to the doctor, and it would be that question that from your medical perspective, try as best as we can to not ignore, but to compartmentalize the emotional journey that she went through and the actual medical situation we have on hand. So from your medical lenses, do you think that this woman is at more of a risk than any other 6-week pregnancy with a heartbeat, just because she had to go through IVF multiple cycles, but now she's pregnant and she's no longer with the fertility specialist. She's in your office. You're high risk, but you're an OBGYN.
What I would say if you ask me that question is once we get to 9 or 10 weeks, when she's off all of the medications that the fertility doctors gave her, then she's regular. But until then, I can't quantify it, but I'm still a little bit more worried than I am with everybody else about having a miscarriage for her. Which really was the next question. Now she's 16 weeks. What do I do with her now at 16 weeks?
Right.
She's still scared out of her mind. She still, relates to, her whole odyssey that she went through, but now she's 16 weeks past that 9-week, threshold.
Right. If the patient would come back to me, and this is Dr. Herman's assessment, I would think that that's enough for shiurim, for not fasting on Tisha B'Av and at all, and shiurim on Yom Kippurim. By the way, just to point out, the Aruch HaShulchan already writes that we don't have shiurim on Tisha B'Av. Yeah. Shiurim is introduced to Yom Kippurim because it's a din d'oraisa, because there's an issur d'oraisa, so we have to do everything in our power, even shiurim, to avoid eating on Yom Kippur unless we absolutely have to. But since Tisha B'Av is the Rabbanan and the heter is choli, so once we get to choli, we don't need to, we could just ignore the fast at that point. The fast was not instituted for such a person. The only time I've seen that the poskim talk about shiurim on Tisha B'Av is, let's say you have a woman, I'll give an example of a woman who's nursing. She's totally fine. She's totally, she has strength. She's ready to fast, but she's just nervous that maybe the fasting will affect her milk production. So she wants to eat, not for herself. She's not sick, but she wants to eat because she wants to make sure that it won't impact her milk supply. So then I saw some poskim say that they should eat shiurim because, again, she's not eating for choli. If she was a chola, then she wouldn't have to fast. Here, she's not a chola. She just wants to make sure that that everything is fine. Everything will be fine with her milk. Not everyone agrees to that, but that's the only situation I really saw poskim mention shiurim by Tisha B'Av. Did I answer the question fully?
She did. Number 5. Okay. A patient is 14 weeks, and she's deciding before the fast when she could go ahead and break the fast. Okay. I just want
to say one more thing, just because I think it's an important point. Just to finish off that question, I apologize for interrupting you. But if a woman's psychological, we also have to remember that this woman who went through her journey, right? So if she is so nervous, again, this is a completely different angle, but if she's so nervous and so anxious about this pregnancy, about fasting on Yom Kippur, because she's had 5 years of no children and failed cycle after failed cycle, and finally she has this amazing pregnancy. So if that is a real concern, a medical concern, that could compromise the pregnancy, so then I think that also has to be considered. For
sure. I think we consider that much more than we should, as opposed, when giving someone a heter. You went through so much, we're going to give you a heter because you went through so much, even though you're perfectly fine and your baby's perfectly fine. That's 16 weeks pregnant. Everything is going fine, and you're now like everybody else. But since you went through your whole odyssey, we should give you a heter. That's what really the discussion was. So it was a psychological discussion.
Right. Again, so my heter wouldn't be based on the fact that we feel bad for you. Of course, we feel bad for you, and we want to give you as much support as possible. But the heter would be if a woman's psychological a woman's psychological state could somehow compromise her pregnancy. So then we have to take that seriously.
Okay. I had a question about fasting on Yom Kippur. I am currently at the end of my first trimester. I assume it's safe for me to fast. However, I just wanted to be proactive and ask if at any point when I should break my fast. If I start feeling contractions, should I immediately drink or eat something? What if I feel very faint or start vomiting, which I heard is a sign of severe dehydration? I have never had any problems in the past. However, I just wanted to be prepared for anything. So my question for you is do we have to wait for a b'diavad case, or do we look at l'chachil and b'diavad, separately? Oh, if you start fasting, if you start throwing up, you don't have to ask your Rav. Go ahead and break your fast. I want to know beforehand what my parameters are. Or do we say we need to wait until something actually happens before giving you a heter to break your fast?
Again, when it comes to Yom Kippur, we need that sakana.
Yeah.
Right? So when these questions happen, they come all the time, and I always send them back to you. Yep. You have to ask Dr. Herman, at what point is the sakana present? Because if the sakana is not present, although it could potentially make its way, the sakana could enter the picture, but if it's not present, then we don't have justification for breaking the fast, even for shiurim. Now, if the doctor says, no, there is a legitimate amount of sakana here, although not a major, but a legitimate level of sakana. So it could be that per the doctor's assessment, that would be enough for shiurim. But in order for the Rav to allow a woman to start drinking shiurim, he needs the doctor's evaluation and assessment to say that there is a sakana here that could justify shiurim.
So I think what she's sort of asking is, could she decide on her own when she gets to that point? Tell me before the fast my parameters, so I could decide on my own when I should drink shiurim and when I should break my fast.
It's a question. It's a tricky question because on Yom Kippur, you're not having your doctor and your rabbi are not usually standing around your bed, and they're not necessarily in arm's reach. And therefore, there is an element where there is a time when a woman's going to have to make a decision. And I'll tell you just one of the stories that Yom Kippur that Rabbi Soloveitchik sent me home so many times. I think at one point, my wife was not feeling well, and I think she needed to drink, but she didn't want to drink because it was Yom Kippur. And I felt that she had to drink. It was based on, we had probably discussed this with you before, Dr. Herman. So based on what you had told me before Yontif, I probably felt, and maybe she even felt intellectually that it was the right thing to do, but emotionally she couldn't bring herself to drink on Yom Kippur. So at that point, I had to stand by her bed and basically make sure that she drinks, because she's not going to do it without the evil policeman making her. So, but a woman has to make those decisions for herself.
But I think that, and I've said it to patients a million times, you need to speak to your Rav before Yontif. You need to set that up and know exactly what you're doing. And maybe the answer is your husband needs to speak to the Rav on Yontif in the middle of shul of what to do. That it can't.
I tell them that you have to speak to the doctor before Yontif. Oh. There's nothing that bothers me more than people that call me on Erev Yom Kippur or come over to me in shul and say, I'm fasting. I'm 6 weeks pregnant. I'm 10 weeks pregnant. Do I have to fast? How can I make a psak without having the medical background? Where were you up until now? Elul, when they clap Elul in shul, when they bench Rosh Chodesh Elul, if you have a medical concern, that should be the wake up call. I have to make an appointment with my doctor, and come prepared to speak to the Rav with all of the medical background. Now, just to finish up with this question, so I think it's critical that the doctor and the patient are in touch so that the patient has an understanding of what are the signs, what are the red flags. And if they're not able to communicate on Yontif itself, on Yom Kippur itself, the patient should be well equipped with the telltale signs that the doctor has told them. Should these things occur, this is a sakana. Now, with that, the Rav can say, okay, that means shiurim, right? it could be that the doctor would say that these red flags, means you missed shiurim. Let's say your water breaks, right? Let's say the water breaks. Once you've reached water breaking, you are done with shiurim. You're going to the hospital and you're eating regularly, right? So that would be an example where you can skip over that stage. But that's why it's so important for the patient to be familiar with the medical condition and the potential red flags, as well as speaking to the Rav before Yom Kippur to know, in this circumstance, should I do shiurim? If shiurim doesn't work, let's say it's this is classic. Contractions. Dr. Herman, I'm sure maybe this is a question also.
Sure.
If I get one contraction, what does that mean for? Let's say let's say they're in the 9th month. Okay. One contraction. What does that mean for me in terms of my pregnancy? 2 contractions, 3 contractions. What the Rav would say is, okay, you're getting contractions. Maybe start shiurim. If the contractions die down, so then wonderful. If they don't die down, they progress and they get stronger. So then you're having a baby.
Right. That's the conversation. Exactly the conversation. Moving on to number 6, we're going to skip because we already addressed it, which is the discussion about shiurim and the difference between Yom Kippur and so on. Number 7, Tisha B'Av, that's a nidcha. So I had a patient who called me, maybe it was an email, and said, this year Tisha B'Av is a nidcha. I'm pregnant. I don't feel so good. I spoke to my Rav, and he says I should fast till Chatzos, and after Chatzos, I don't need to fast. So I want to know, is it because it's the 10th of Av and you've reached halfway through the day, and now it is different than Tisha B'Av until halfway through, the next day? Why did they come up with just fast until Chatzos and then you could stop it?
So there's different shittas, there are different opinions about Tisha B'Av Shenidcha, like this year when Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos and then is observed on Sunday. So some shittas hold that a pregnant woman, a nursing woman, anyone who doesn't feel well, they do not have to fast at all. And since it's not the 9th of Av, it's the 10th of Av, so therefore only those who are well and healthy, male or female, are the ones who have to fast. But anyone who is not feeling well, including a pregnant woman or a nursing woman, does not have to fast. The truth is, Rav Ovadia Yosef in the Tshuva, so he writes that that's the halacha. The Ikar Adin, that's the halacha. He does write, though, he continues and says that there is something special about doing what the rest of Klal Yisrael is doing and starting with Klal Yisrael. And if you have to break your fast, then you break your fast. But at least everyone began Tisha B'Av together. He also mentions the idea of Chatzos. I don't know if this is where the Rav got it, but Rav Ovadia writes that. I've heard this from Rabbi Soloveitchik, quoting this Rav Ovadia, that Rav Ovadia writes that according to many Rishonim, fasting until Chatzos, on any fast day, fasting until Chatzos is a fulfillment of Tainus. In order to fulfill a day of Tainus, a day of fasting, you don't need to fast the whole day. We obviously do in normal circumstances. But according to many Rishonim, the Tainus is satisfied and fulfilled at Chatzos. And therefore, if a woman can make it to Chatzos, again, without compromising herself or her fetus, so they should try to go to Chatzos, because then they'll get the kiyum, the fulfillment of Tainus. If they can't do that, then they certainly do not need to push themselves. Tisha B'Av Shenidcha, the way I would phrase it, is that it's certainly not a day where you have to push yourself. The moment you reach the stage where you feel you have to push yourself to keep on going, right off the bat, you can break your fast.
Okay, a couple of these we've addressed already, but we're going to go quickly through them. Number 9.
You have to make Havdalah, though. It's important that people know on a Tisha B'Av Shenidcha, since it's out coming off of Shabbos, if you're breaking your fast, you have to make Havdalah. You're not allowed to eat before Havdalah. And there's different ways. You can ask your rabbi how to make Havdalah. The way I tell people is that the women can make Havdalah themselves. Some shittas hold that the husband should be motzi for the women and the women should drink, or a minor should drink. It's confusing. If a woman makes Havdalah, if she woman is pregnant, she's not fasting on Tisha B'Av, Shenidcha, she can make Havdalah herself. She should not make Havdalah on wine or grape juice because it's Tisha B'Av. We shouldn't drink wine or grape juice. And pregnant women shouldn't drink beer, although maybe we could ask, I don't know, maybe in the 9th month, maybe it's not so bad.
No.
So then they shouldn't drink beer, which leaves us with coffee, which could be hot. So maybe iced coffee or orange juice, juice or coffee could be Chamar Medina that you can make Havdalah on. You can't make Havdalah on water, but you can, or tea, but coffee or juice. They should just make a shahakol and Baruch Hamavdo ben Kodesh L'Chol ben Alachosh ben Yisrael Amin and make the bracha and then drink and then they're done. But they should make Havdalah whether it's at Matzah Shabbos, they're eating right away, or Sunday morning when they wake up and they need to have a bowl of cereal, they should make Havdalah on their iced coffee in the morning.
Number 9, again, we addressed the next couple of them. Is it safe for me to fast on Yom Kippur? I'm pregnant and I'm breastfeeding. Some patients.
Well, I mean, what do you? What?
It is usual or not unusual for a woman to continue breastfeeding while she's pregnant. I used to tell patients that they could breastfeed until halfway through, but I did some research and read a number of papers that said breastfeeding the entire pregnancy is safe and doesn't actually bring on preterm labor when they looked at it, or labor.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I can't. Yeah, they're not exclusively, but they probably won't produce enough milk to exclusively breastfeed.
They'll probably
again.
They might lose their milk if they do fast.
Right.
But it was just, again, it was an interesting. My emails are very interesting. That's all I have to say.
Breastfeeding and pregnant on Yom Kippur.
I don't feel that she's going to miscarry if she, it's just a matter of, listen, the next day you're not going to have enough breast milk anymore. I don't think that she's any more at risk than if just saying breastfeeding and just saying pregnant.
Yeah. I believe they say in the name of the Chazon Ish, I have to look this up, but I believe they say in the name of the Chazon Ish that shiurim is enough. If she's not obligated to not do shiurim on Yom Kippur at the expense of her milk supply completely. And therefore, it makes sense, I think, that such a woman in such a scenario, should she go an entire day without eating, it would seriously impact her milk supply, that would be enough for shiurim. And also she could get dehydrated. She's more at risk for dehydration. It sounds like shiurim in that case would be acceptable, but I would want to double check. But that's what I think. I think it would be acceptable.
Number 10. 19.
Does that make sense for you on a medical level? That makes it that's a reasonable psak?
I think so, yeah. Number 10. 19 weeks pregnant with previous miscarriages. My last 2 pregnancies were miscarriages, thank God. So far, this pregnancy is healthy and going well. As Yom Kippur approaches, I'm getting a bit worried about fasting. I'm almost 19 weeks pregnant. I'm still feeling nauseous and still throwing up. I'll be home with my 2 kids and I'm feeling very, very nervous. I spoke with my Rav and he said it's completely a medical question and that we should consult with our doctor. I put underneath that the husband's role in all of this, which you addressed already. He should not even go to shul.
It sounds like this is the classic case where wife stays in bed for the entire Yom Kippur with the air conditioning on 67, and she drinks a whole lot of water or Gatorade before the fast. She stays in bed, and the husband stays in shul and watches the kids and makes sure. When the kids come home from school on Erev Shavuos, they come with these little signs: "Don't disturb Tati because Tati's sleeping because he stayed up all night." So that we should make those on Yom Kippur. We should put on the door: "Don't disturb mommy. Mommy is fasting." And we have to do everything in our power to see to it that mommy can fast. That's what it sounds like. And then if she starts to feel weak, more weak, than usual, or she starts to get contractions, then that's a separate story.
Number 11, 20 weeks twins. I wanted to let you know that thank God my 20-week sonogram went really well. One baby is measuring 41st percentile. The other one is 44th percentile. My cervix looks long. I wanted to know if caffeine suppositories are okay for Yom Kippur. How bad is it to fast? Is it a severe risk or danger? I'm going to ask a Rav about fasting and what I can do, but just wanted to know if there's anything additional I should tell the Rav. So the question is about carrying twins and about caffeine suppositories.
So let's hear from you about twins. How do we view a multifetal pregnancy?
Okay. So it is at greater risk for preterm labor and preterm delivery. That is the theme of the entire pregnancy. At 20 weeks, I don't think that risk is so high. At 24 weeks, you said you need to do everything you can not to go into labor. That's the general instruction. If you have to consider not working, depending on what your work is. You do not stay up late. You do not go out Motzei Shabbos and stay out late. You make sure that you're well hydrated. You have to turn from a pregnant patient into a chicken who's sitting on her chicks. That is the general discussion that we have for twin pregnancies once they get to sort of viability at 24 weeks.
So, having relations?
I don't restrict them for it, but I also alert them to what happens, be cognizant of what happens when you have relations. And if we see that it's provoking contractions, then we might have to do something else.
Okay.
And then the caffeine suppositories on Yom Kippur.
Okay, so in terms of the medical perspective of a multifetal pregnancy, so it sounds like you mentioned that 20 weeks you're not so concerned, but would you say it is similar to another case, let's say a singleton pregnancy where we would allow for shiurim?
Yes.
Okay, so then it seems like shiurim would be the appropriate halachic route.
At 20 weeks with a single baby, I would say, what are we talking about shiurim? Fast and then see if you need shiurim.
Fast, correct.
Fast and see if you need caffeine suppositories.
Caffeine suppositories. So
all the rage now. It's all the rage. Tylenol suppositories and caffeine suppositories.
Yeah. You know the joke. The joke about the guy who goes to the pharmacist. The guy who goes to the pharmacist and he's waiting online, and finally he orders 150 suppositories. So someone says, "Your order is 150 suppositories? What's going on over here?" He says, "Yeah, I have yard site and sure, it's Yom Kippur, so I'm making kiddush, so I'm ordering for the whole shul."
Yeah.
So it's a common thing that people want suppositories. The reason why they want suppositories is because they don't want to swallow a pill.
Right.
Okay. So that is a machlokas. That's a machlokas whether or not on Yom Kippur a person is able to swallow a caffeine pill or a Tylenol for that matter. The more machmir approach says you cannot. The more makel approach says you can. So there is a machlokas about swallowing pills on Yom Kippur. Many people are machmir, and therefore they go for the suppository route. There's no shaila of eating on Yom Kippur if you're inserting a suppository. That's not a shaila. The only shaila is that of refuah, that on Shabbos and Yontif, certainly on Yom Kippur, there's refuah is not allowed unless under certain circumstances. One of the circumstances where refuah is allowed, taking medicine on Shabbos, is where if a person is going to be incapacitated, they're going to have to go to bed, they're going to have to excuse themselves and lie down. So if that's the case, that a person feels that they won't be able to function on Yom Kippur, they won't be able to go to shul, they won't be able to even stand, they'd have to go to bed, or they're going to get such a headache that it's going to be so incapacitating and disruptive. So then that would justify taking medicine. Reb Shlomo Zalman writes, you're not obligated to wait until the headache comes. If you know, I'll take me for example, I know that if I don't have coffee as of 9 o'clock or 9:30 in the morning, my headache starts to set in. So I don't have to wait until I get a headache to take a Tylenol on Shabbos. If for whatever reason I can't have coffee and I need a Tylenol, I'm able to take it knowing that my body, that I will get that headache. So there's no issue with suppositories. The shaila is, can you take a pill? Can you take a pill? I'm definitely makel on all the Tanesim. On the minor fast, on Tisha B'Av, I'm definitely makel. On Tisha B'Av, you do not need a suppository. You could take medicine on Yom Kippur, even on Tisha B'Av, and you can swallow it. I would even say if you need a little bit of water to help the pill go down, I would be matir for that as well, even on Tisha B'Av. A little bit of water. And that goes for any medication. If you need a little bit of water, women who have to take their birth control, if you need to take it with a little bit of water, you can take it with a little bit of water on Tisha B'Av, not on Yom Kippur.
It's interesting because I tell them to take it right before the fast and take it right again after the fast.
If you can do it, that's great. If you can do it, that's great. If you could do it, that's great. On Tisha B'Av, it's fine. You don't have to worry about it. On Tisha B'Av, it's fine. Yom Kippur is a different issue. So if a person wants to be machmir, matov manoim, that's beautiful. They'll take a suppository. If not, there is room to be makel, but just be very careful because not everyone agrees. So we're dealing with Yom Kippur. Just, it shouldn't be taken lightly. But that would be the story. But suppositories are always okay in Yom Kippur, assuming the refuah is justified. 34
weeks with diabetes. I'm now almost 34 weeks and have gestational diabetes. And started taking insulin every night to help lower my blood sugar in the morning. The rest of the day, my numbers are generally okay if I'm careful when I'm eating. In terms of fasting on Yom Kippur, my Rav wants to know what would be the dangers of me fasting specifically due to gestational diabetes? Would my blood sugar go too low? And what would be the other side effects? So in general, what about fasting at 34 weeks? So we're going to differentiate between gestational diabetes and a real diabetic, someone who's diabetic. The diabetic who's a diabetic from when she's 5 years old, we don't need to talk about.
Correct.
We just don't need to talk about. In my view, the diabetic, in this case, if she could monitor her sugars, which is a question in itself.
Correct.
Monitoring your sugars, if her sugars remain good, I don't see any reason she can't fast.
There it is. If that's the case, and then what the rest of the discussion with the rabbi is now how to monitor, taking it blood, whatnot, the new scan on the arm, the monitor.
This one's not going to have a new scan on the arm. It's gestational diabetes. She's going to do a finger stick and put it in a machine and do that. That sounds to me that's preferable to do that than to break your fast.
You can do those things. You can do in a way of a shinui. Mm-hmm. Right. Generally, removing blood is an issue deraisa, though. Right. Removing blood on Shabbos for the sake of the blood is here. You want the blood, right? Here you want the blood. You want the blood because you need to test it. Yeah. So that's not a malacha she'ena tzricha legufa. That's you're being motzi the dam for the dam. Can't get worse than that. But that being said, there is a sakana. A woman does need to test herself, because we need to make sure that her levels are okay. So we generally do allow a woman to do that by implementing as many shinuyim as possible to bring it down to the level of drabanan, the way she holds the prick, the needle, the way that she squeezes, or maybe she doesn't even have to squeeze. If it comes out itself, even better. We generally we're not worried about dirtying up or coloring the little paper. That's just like using a napkin or doing a badika cloth. Ever wonder why doing a badika on Shabbos is not a problem with tzovea? So when you're wiping off ketchup from your mouth, you can say, I don't want the color. I don't care the fact that I'm dirtying up my napkin after I wipe my mouth with the chrein from the gefilte fish. I don't care. But when a woman does a badika, to see if she's anida, to see if she's bleeding or not, and then we examine the cloth, you want to see what the color is there. You absolutely want the color. You need the color. You need to see what that color is to determine whether or not there's. So the poskim ask, why is that not a shaila of tzoveya on Shabbos? But anyway, not our discussion. It's not a problem. But so that way the blood on the paper is also not an issue. Assuming her numbers are okay and the doctor is comfortable, we would say no fast. We would say no. Don't even have shiurim. But once the doctor says that there's a sakana, so then shiurim, and then she continues to monitor. If it gets better, then she either stops or continues with shiurim. If it gets worse, then she has to break her fast.
So I think we're gonna end with this next one, the third trimester and getting an IV. I wanted to know what I'm supposed to do about fasting on Yom Kippur. I'll be 33 weeks in Mirza Hashem. I am nervous about the fast. A Hatzalah member is my neighbor, And he said, I should speak to you about setting up an IV. Do you think it makes sense for me to do that? I get multiple requests every Yom Kippur for this.
I will answer you with my opinion. Not everyone agrees to this, but in my opinion, and my opinion is just what I've heard from my Rebbe and what I've gathered over the years, it depends. Someone whose neighbor is a Hatzalah man, whose husband is in Hatzalah, their very close friend is in Hatzalah, and it's natural, the guy's going to be around, and it's not a big deal. I would say that they should, if this is what they want, put in the IV before Yom Kippur, not on Yom Kippur, but before Yom Kippur. And if that's the way that she's able to stay hydrated and to fast, I'm all for it. I'm not jumping to make a public psak that everyone should line up at their local urgent care, and everyone should be putting in these IVs. I don't know if it's the safest to have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people running around with IVs Erev Yantif and then going home in bags and this and that. But on a smaller scale, you ask me a personal shaila, I would tell someone if they have the wherewithal, the bandwidth to get the Hatzalah guy to come to the house and to do it. And there's a little bit of monitoring even on Yantif of the Hatzalah man, making sure everything's okay. I think that's a good idea. That was the opinion of Rabbi Aaron Soloveitchik. I think Rabbi Yosef felt like that as well. And one should do it. I'm a little bit hesitant to go public with it because I just don't think it's a great idea to have so many people putting in IVs before Yantif. But assuming it can stay monitored and it can stay small and responsible, I actually do think that's a good idea because it'll prevent them from having to break the fast. And as we said, fasting on Yom Kippur is the primary mitzvah.
Okay. Actually, there's one more.
What's your opinion on the IV? You can argue with me.
I always thought it was a very strange approach, and I certainly don't endorse it. I consent to it when the patient says they're doing it. I don't fight them. I may turn around when I hang up the phone or get off the phone and say, why are they doing this? This is just, start by fasting, you'll do fine, type of thing. But it's common current. I feel it's getting much more common now. I feel more and more and more people are doing it. So I don't fight them, but also I say, in my heart, I don't think that you really need to do this.
The question is whether you're mechuyev. The question is whether you're obligated to do it. You might not be obligated to do it, but if a woman wants to do it because she'll feel better, the Rav told me I have to fast. So given the circumstance, I have to fast. I'm going to feel like garbage if I fast, but at least I'll stay hydrated that way.
Okay. That's really what it is. Okay. If that's...
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I want to finish one last thing. So people who've given birth. Someone who gave birth today and tomorrow is Yom Kippur. Someone who gave birth, 7 days ago, and someone who gave birth within the next 6 weeks after, within 6 weeks of Yom Kippur.
Yeah. So for Tisha B'Av, there's no fasting. Within 30 days, we generally assume. And then Yom Kippur. The truth is, I have to look back at these halachas. With the Yom Kippur, there's a difference between 3 days. Within 3 days, there's no fasting. That the Gemara says she's a chol sheyesh b'sakana. Then there's 7 days and 30 days. I think for Yom Kippur, we're more machmir. There's machlokas about between 7 and 30. There are, I don't want to say anything right now because I didn't look this up, but I think that there are many poskim who say that she should go in either shiurim, right, or fasting, and then kind of playing it by ear. But again, I have to look that one up.
Leave that for now. With that said, we're going to turn over to abortion and halacha follow-up questions. Okay, we're going to try to do these in the next 15 minutes and then call it a night. Number one, fetal reduction. A whole big swing we're doing right now. A woman underwent IVF and finds out she's pregnant with quadruplets. The doctor recommends that she has a fetal reduction. All the babies are healthy as far as they could tell. And they're suggesting that they reduce it from 4 down to 2. Not to 3, but to 2. How does halacha view this case? And to tell you, do you know how which ones they choose? The easiest ones they could get to. That's how they choose which ones to read.
Yeah. Okay, so when it comes to multifetal reduction, so the poskim almost unanimously agree that a pregnancy with 4 there's a heter off the bat. 3 is not so clear.
Well, that's
3 is not so clear.
I went from 4 down to 2 for that reason.
Yeah, 3 is not so clear. We have a number of shilas where women call they're expecting triplets, and it's very hard to find a blanket heter that says reduced to 2 from 3. It really does depend on the woman's medical situation. Once you're reducing it 4, so then there's a machlokas whether you're allowed to reduce from 4 to 3, or whether you must go from 4 to 3, or from 4 to 2. There are a number of poskim that say you can go from 4 to 2. And you're not obligated to put yourself in that other sakana of 3, that potential once you're doing it anyway. Now, usually the way that halacha tells us to reduce, and medicine would agree with this, is that you find if any of the fetuses are genetically abnormal.
But how can you figure that out until you test them?
Give CVS.
And 4, you're never going to get that answer.
No,
I can't believe you're going to get 4 CVSs healthy. I've never heard that being done.
Again, you get healthy. Yeah, correct. I mean, 1 is inevitably abnormal.
No, I'm saying if you do,
you're not going to get the results.
I think you're not going to find a doctor to do that, because I think they're going to really believe if you do 4 CVSs, you're going to lose the whole pregnancy.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, they're going to look at the form of the babies and try to make a judgment based on this one looks stronger, or they do it by this one's the easiest to reach. So we're going to go
correct. That would be the halachically indicated as well.
So I'm saying that they're equal to each other, and you're picking one versus the other, and so on.
At that point, it doesn't make a difference.
Okay, number 2. If one does IVF and does not use all the zygotes, all the pregnancy, all the zygotes, what does one do with the embryos? What does one do with the remaining ones? Is it considered any type of? Is it just to throw them out? We heard a story in Israel of a woman decided to freeze them forever. She felt she couldn't destroy an embryo that was already in existence. Is there any issue with halacha? We're just saying, listen, I'm going to use these 3, and you can destroy the rest of them and send them off.
According to halacha, life begins in implantation.
Okay, so then
the embryos do not have a status of a life. To paint a bit of a different picture, you're the doctor. You get an alert on Shabbos that you don't have a generator. This is before the days of generators.
Right.
You get an alert that there's a blackout in your lab, which means that all of your patient's embryos are now beginning to thaw, unless you go and restore the energy, the electricity.
This actually happened. This happened for real.
This happened. Now we have generators.
Yeah.
Now any place that doesn't have a backup generator should be sued. But this place didn't have a backup generator. It's a shayla that happened in Eretz Yisrael. Are you allowed to go in your car, driven by you, the Jew, and go restore the electricity? Right? We're only allowed to be machalish. You're only allowed to drive on Shabbos for pikuach nefesh. So do these embryos have a status of life that would justify driving on Shabbos? Or is it no? It's not. It's not life. It's very it's my blood, sweat, and tears. It's my genes, but it's not life. In which case you would not allow. So the poskim have ruled that one is not allowed to get into a car and be machal Shabbos. You could be driven by a non-Jew. You have to get there. It's a serious issue, but it would not justify chilul Shabbos because it's not life, and therefore it wouldn't be a shaila of terminating because it's not life. It can be discarded.
Can you discuss the difference in pregnancy timeline? If something bad is found with the baby and the person is before 40 days, that's one time, until 12 weeks, which is a common law in Europe and that you could terminate before 12 weeks, before viability, meaning before 24 weeks, and then after viability, the baby is now 30 weeks pregnant.
Right. This really goes back to the discussion we had last time. It really depends on which shita you subscribe to, which school of thought. According to Rav Moshe held that a pregnancy is life even before 40 days. And the fact that the Gemara says that before 40 days is Maya Ba'alma, it doesn't mean that it's not life. And therefore there's an issur to terminate even within 40 days. So therefore, according to Rav Moshe, there really is absolutely no difference. Right. According to other shitas who don't subscribe to Rav Moshe's approach, that terminating is ritzicha, it's murder, but it's something else. So then there's what to talk about. Then we do find different poskim addressing the shaila. You won't find a posik, I don't think, that would say that within 40 days it's mutter lechatchila, right? That abortion is permissible within 40 days. But you definitely will find a certain attitude that before 40 days, where there's a little bit more wiggle room than after 40 days. The 12 weeks, although it comes up in some halachic literature, it doesn't really carry much weight. The Tzitz Eliezer has some strange line where I think he's talking about a Tay-Sachs baby, or maybe it was Down syndrome. I don't remember exactly what it was, but he says even until the 7th month. He says the 7th month. Which really begs
after viability. If you deliver the baby would live. But now
that's what it is. 7. That's
now that you see something is terribly wrong, could you, even though if you deliver the baby could you go and stop the baby's heart, and so on after, let's say, 24 weeks?
Yeah. So I mean, again, there are different shitas. So there are different shitas for the most part. Once you're in one camp, the Rav Moshe camp, it's completely usher even before 40 days. And once you're in another camp, so there's not too much halachic significance between the other. If the situation is justified, then it's justified.
Number 4, can you look for a Rav who's Mekel? And this question comes up all the time. Dr. Herman, who should I call? Who's the Rav that's Mekel? I'm calling my Rav. I don't want to know what my Rav says. My Rav is not a medical Rav, but
right.
Yeah. Who to call?
I'll tell you like this.
Handle that.
Yeah, I'll tell you like this. I once did shimush by a certain Rav, and he told me the following story. He told me that he was once sitting with Reb Shlomo Zalman, and a woman knocked on the door, and she was crying, and she asked to speak to Reb Shlomo Zalman. Reb Shlomo Zalman said, "I'm in the middle of a meeting." So the Rav, who I was learning with, he said, if you need to speak to Reb Shlomo Zalman, that's fine, but do you mind if I stick around and listen to the conversation? So she didn't mind. So she sat down, and he told me he was there for this conversation. So she asked Reb Shlomo Zalman for a heter to abort to the pregnancy. Reb Shlomo Zalman was very machmir. Reb Shlomo Zalman held like Reb Moshe, that you cannot terminate. Reb Shlomo Zalman heard the woman, and this Rav told me, then Reb Shlomo Zalman said, listen, I personally can't give you a heter, but here is the address of a great Rav, the Tzitz Eliezer. Here's his address. Here's his phone number. Go seek out the advice and the direction of the Tzitz Eliezer. Have a nice day. So the Rav told me when he was sitting, he saw Reb Shlomo Zalman that under certain circumstances, even if we don't agree with the psak necessarily, if a person is a competent posek, he's a reliable halachic authority, even though I don't necessarily agree, sometimes we do find a heter to go and seek out a different halachic opinion. It could also be that this specific area of halacha is a significant one. It's not like can I open a bottle cap on Shabbos? Listen, I can't give you the heter, but there's a Rav down the block. If you ask him, if we're talking about opening up bottle caps on Shabbos, and your Rav says not to open bottle caps, so you should listen to your Rav. But Rabbanim should be cognizant of there's different grades, there's different tiers of shilas. There's bottle caps, and then there's terminating a pregnancy. And Rabbanim should be able to exercise the right to send someone to the proper address when necessary.
Does a husband have any rights in the decision making? So I want to tell you about a case. A patient is pregnant with a Down syndrome pregnancy that we know of, because we could figure that out early. And the baby is hydropic. Already, we see this as a bad situation. This baby is not going to make it to the end of pregnancy. Okay? And she got a psak that she could terminate, but she won't. Why? Because her husband won't let her. And she comes to the office every day, hoping that there's no heartbeat. Obviously, she's not going to go behind the husband's back and terminate, but this was a real issue. And when we asked, could we speak to your Rav, we were turned down and said, no, you can't speak to our Rav about what's going on. So I don't even know what the question was, but that was, but it was a very difficult story, a very difficult story to take care of. I don't know.
I'm not sure what the question is, but it sounds like there should be a psychologist who will join us for the conversation, because it seems like that is his struggle. If they got a psak from a Rav, and the heter and the psak was to terminate, so he should, all parties should respect the psak, whether a psak is l'chumra or l'kula. A psak is a psak.
Okay.
Now,
maybe I want to skip down to the last one, and I want to read this to you.
Okay.
This is from a patient, a friend who sent me this, and it's a quote. I'm working with a family now that is very ashamed. The couple is Sephardi, which adds an extra layer. I would like Rabbi Sigelman to spend more time on how a couple needs support, that they should not feel like they're horrible Jews, and just know they aren't alone, because there's a lot of people out there like that. And I think these two cases cross over each other.
Yeah. It's a hard question to address, because
when somebody loses a baby, everybody feels bad for them. When someone has to terminate a baby, 1 second later, the baby has no heartbeat and everybody feels bad. 1 second before the baby is going to have its last heartbeat, this family is ashamed and everybody's like, they can't tell their relatives, they hold it against them. We can't marry into this family. Look what they do. Look what this family does.
Yeah. I think where it comes from is, and I'm not saying that we're wrong. I'm not saying this is wrong. I think it is what it is, that our educational system is constructed in a way where we are taught from as early as we can understand the concept of abortion, we are taught that it is absolutely forbidden and there are zero exceptions, right? Again, I'm not saying that that's wrong in terms of a chinuch and a chinuch derech. I'm not saying that it's wrong per se. I'm not saying it's right, but it is what it is. And I think that paints a very shameful picture to anyone who gets a heter from a Rav, because they can't come to terms with it. If a Rav says something is not muktzah on Shabbos, so we're okay with that. We're familiar with things being muktzah, not muktzah. Maybe some Rabbanim say yes, some Rabbanim say no, and that's something that we can cope with. That's something we could digest, we could swallow, and we're comfortable with it. When a Rav says you can terminate, so that's like, who is this Rav? Like, how could that be? And everybody knows you can't terminate.
Right.
And for some people, they're able to kind of marginalize their own emotional obstacles and just kind of attach themselves to the Rav and say, this is what the Rav said. And even if we're doing an Aveira, it's not on our cheshbon, it's not on our shoulders, it's the Rav. And some people are happy with that. other people just can't get past it. And so I think that what Rabbanim could do is not just issue a psak, but issue a psak in a way, if in fact that's what's halachically acceptable for whatever reason. So then also be sensitive to the fact that this is a huge decision, right? This is a huge decision. And it also can never be made without the husband and wife present. The Rav has to be so clear that this is, that everyone's on the same page and it's not going to send someone off in the wrong way. I'll just share with you one thing that a woman who works with a funeral home told me. She is involved in burying, whatever it is, we're burying the fetus,
Okay,
whether it's a mistake.
I want to go back from number 9 to number 8.
Okay.
What is the patient's obligation to bury the fetal tissue, or can the hospital dispose of it?
Okay, so
I suspect that it's coming from the same person who you're talking about. I bet we are talking about the same person.
Okay.
Okay.
Good. So anyway, so if it's the same person, she's a wonderful woman. She does tremendous work. And she told, in terms of the obligation of the fetal tissue, if the fetus has a tzuras havlad, which we generally assume is sometime after 12 weeks. Before 12 weeks, we generally assume not, and the hospital can take care of it. After 12 weeks, it also depends, let's assume it's somewhat, 12, 15, certainly even 20. There's a tzuras havlad, there's a fetal shape and form. The chevra takes over. We call in the chevra kadisha takes over. The parents have zero involvement. The parents don't know where the baby is buried. The parents don't know what the baby's name is. The parents don't know maybe if it's a boy or a girl. If it is a boy, they give him a bris and that's it. The parents are not involved. Now, for some people, that's very wonderful because they don't want to be involved. It's too painful to be involved. For other people, it's horrible because there's no closure. So this woman told me that when she buries, did I say this last time? I don't even remember if I said this last time.
She told me this. Like you're about to say, she told me the same thing. Okay.
So when she buries babies, fetal tissue, whatever stage of the pregnancy it was at, she'll sometimes call one of these couples and will invite them to join her for someone else's fetus. And that's the closure that couple needed to be able to now move on and to help them overcome the emotional hurdles that they're experiencing. For some people, it works. For some people, I imagine it doesn't. But I definitely agree with her. I mean, it's nice that she even called me out by name, but that in your email. But I definitely think that the Rabbanim could be more sensitive when issuing the psak or when speaking about it. And again, I'm not sure that society can do anything because the educational system and the mahalach of education, it is what it is. And I'm not sure I'm interested or ready or agree that it should be changed. But people who are the parties involved should be as sensitive as possible to see to it that the couple are making the right decision, assuming that they're going with the psak of a Rav, and that the Rav is kind of the one who's in charge and helping them with this process.
We have 2 more in the next 7 minutes.
Okay, got that mincha soon.
A woman decides she wants to electively terminate. Jewish,
okay.
or non-Jewish, non-Jewish, whatever. They want to terminate. The patient is sent to a frum sonographer, and this question came from a frum sonographer. Based on her scan that this frum sonographer will now do, she is tasked with determining how far along the patient is and where the placenta is. The doctor needs that information and will not do the termination, elective termination.
Yeah.
So this frum sonographer does the ultrasound to tell the doctor how far along they are and where the placenta is. And she feels very badly doing this, but it's part of her job. And the sonographer wants to know what halacha says about what she's doing.
I mean, she's really not doing anything, and she's just reporting. She's just taking basic pictures and basic scans and basic measurements, right? She's not doing. She's not
specifically what she's doing. She knows that this woman who's going to terminate is not following halacha, and she feels she's contributing to that by doing these scans. You understand her angst.
Yeah, but it's not like she's a nurse who's told to actively participate in the termination that she so objects to. She's just giving, let me ask you a question. And let's say she was the secretary. She was she has to check her in.
Yeah.
She has to take her insurance card and scan it and make her sign in. Is that woman less involved in this process than the sonographer?
Not really, because again, it can't be accomplished without her. So
I would again, this is not halach lamaisa. Al regel achas. I would think that's the last amount of involvement she could have and go to sleep at night knowing that she didn't do anything wrong. Okay. Beyond that, once she submits the measurements and she submits the scans and the pictures and everything like that, the images. So at that point, then that's where the shaila really becomes a real shaila. But up until then, it's the prerequisite scans and tests. But Libi Omerli that's still okay.
Okay. And the last is a review. Can you talk more about specifically Down syndrome? That's a common finding, and the approach to terminating. Does it matter if it's a first baby, a third baby, the last baby? What helps you decide in a Down syndrome situation if someone could remain pregnant or not, or should remain pregnant or can terminate?
I'm very hesitant to answer this question.
Okay, so that we don't have to. We don't have
to. End like that. You can't end like that.
Okay, I can.
Okay.
Because it depends. It's just the reason why you don't want to answer that question.
I don't want to answer that question. I don't have a Down syndrome child.
Right.
I don't know what it's like to have a Down syndrome child, but I would imagine that if I were to ever say that you should not carry this pregnancy because it's a Down syndrome child, my inbox would be filled the next day with angry parents who have the most beautiful mishpachas because of their Down syndrome children. So I think it's very personal for the people who are asking the shaila. I think a Rav has to, forgetting the halachic discussion, just hear out what the concerns are. People shouldn't make decisions without consulting with people who have Down syndrome children in the family. I've heard on multiple occasions parents speaking about their family, what it was before the Down syndrome child was born and after the Down syndrome child was born, and they don't know how they could possibly have their beautiful mishpacha without the Down syndrome child. How it taught the children patience, how it taught the other children ava, and all of the amazing things that it did to the mishpacha. So I can't answer it publicly. It's something which is way too sensitive, and it's something way too personal to even be brought up in a public forum.
I think that I have to agree with you because I sit in shul with a family, and there's now a grown up. I watched him grow up, and I think that's exactly the attitude of the family. My experience with my patients who've carried, and have birthed Down syndrome babies, and we speak to them years later. I think a lot of them have that attitude. So I think it's very appropriate to turn down this question.
Chazon Ish stood up for them. The Down syndrome boy walked into the Chazon Ish, he would stand up. He would say, you can't sit down, you have to stand up. So anyway, we should all be benched with Zarachai v'Kayama, healthy children, and the situations that we're in. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give us the siyata d'shmaya to overcome all of the nisyonos in a very meaningful and powerful way.
Amen. Have a meaningful fast, everybody, and we'll wish everybody a good night.